Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Gary Summers, and welcome to Mind, Body, Soul, a program about your mental, physical, and spiritual wellness. And we've got a great in-studio guest. So my guest today is from St. John's and has nearly 2 decades worth of experience working in the nutrition field across Canada. Tara is founder of Healthy Balance Holistic Health Group in St. John's, and her services are covered by most insurances. She embraces the concept of nourishing and nurturing our body for optimum health and wellness. Tara is going to talk about nutrition for life, an empowering discussion to open our minds to the concept of nurturing and nourishing our body along with our health, one day at a time. Welcome back, Tara Antle.
Thank you so much, Gary.
So Tara, just give our listeners some idea as to what they can expect to hear from you today.
We're actually going to talk a little bit about Newfoundland culture and how that impacts our value and belief system towards food. Food is not just about being a robot, do this and do that. It's on a deeper level. It's like peeling an onion. So we're going to go down into the layers and take a closer look at simple everyday things that we can do to make our lives healthier overall.
Would you say that some of our traditional Newfoundland foods are detrimental to our health?
I think the way that we build our meals are, I don't believe with having to cut anything out. But if we learn how to blend it in and build a meal out of it, we can incorporate it in on a regular basis as well.
Tara, I can sense your enthusiasm. It just exudes. What was the big influences in your life that made you take this path?
I guess everybody has a story where it begins to. And this is one I share. First, I was a little bit uneasy about sharing, but I started to a few years ago, and I give seminars. I do a seminar. It's called Investing in Yourself for a Healthier Future. So we're talking about stocks and bonds and real estate. And what would you do if you retired? And what would you do if you won the lottery? And, I asked that question, and then I share the experience that back in 1980, my grandfather actually won the lottery here in the province. It was the biggest win at the time. It was $1 million. He won it on his 55th birthday. So it was a pretty incredible experience. We still put lotto tickets in our cards, so it doesn't run through the family.
Well, I've never met anybody who won the lottery. Now I can say I did.
Right? Well, I was in kindergarten at the time, and I went to Mercy. I was a very quiet child, and I can remember the teachers were outside my kindergarten class, and they came in and they said, "Tara, we heard your family had some good news on the weekend." And I said, "Yes, miss, we did." She said, "Well, tell the class what happened." And I said, "Well, my papi won some money." And they said, "Well, tell the class how much." And they said, "Miss, he won so much money. He won $100." And that's all that it meant at the time. And, him and my grandmother, they enjoyed it for a little bit and traveled and, did their thing. But my grandfather was a severe diabetic who did not believe that lifestyle or food had any impact on his health or well-being. By the time I was in grade 10, he had passed away, so he passed away before he was 65. He was in a wheelchair, amputated above the knee on one leg, below on the other. So it was surgery after surgery after surgery. He eventually developed colon cancer and passed away from a stroke. So for me, my lesson is learned hard. I mean, you can have all the money in the world,
absolutely.
But without our health, what do we really have? And when you look at that, my memories of him are in a hospital bed because he started to get sick when I was probably about grade 2. And it was just, where do we go to see Papi? Oh, we go to the hospital. And we really missed out on each other. Like, he didn't get to see me graduate high school. And, there was a full relationship that was just kind of taken away there. The benefit of, I guess, the lottery win is that it actually kept him at home for longer because he could put supports in place. Back in the 1980s, the healthcare system was a little bit different.
So, Tara, you believe that if he had a more healthy lifestyle, he'd be still around?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think his quality of life would have been a whole lot better, as opposed to, it's almost like with family history or medical conditions. We can cough it up and say it's in the family. I mean, I just shared, just off that, there's colon cancer, there's cardiovascular disease, there's diabetes all around me, so I have a target on my head. And there's choices I can make with my lifestyle to rev it up and get it going and, really enhance it. Or there's choices I can make with my lifestyle that I can smolder it down, decrease the severity, maybe delay the onset or avoid it altogether. So I choose to take that route. It would be nice with lifestyle if we said you did A, B, and C, this would be the outcome. But it doesn't work that way. You could have 3 or 4 different people with similar set of circumstance and have 3 different outcomes.
So it doesn't necessarily mean that because your parents had diabetes or your parents had a cholesterol problem that your fate is sealed.
Right.
You do have more control over that than you think you do.
Right. Control what we can control. Our family history is a gift because it puts the markers on the wall. Obviously it increases our risk for certain medical conditions. But in saying that, what can we do to empower it to try to kind of be in the driver's seat and take back control of our own health and do what we can do to smolder it down a bit?
And Tara, I guess you believe this because when we compare Newfoundland with the rest of Canada, we tend to be a little bit behind health-wise.
Absolutely. Again, with isolation, our province is actually one of the best ones that researchers love to do studies in because of the genetic makeup here as well, and because we are isolated, we top the charts for certain medical and health conditions such as diabetes, cardiovascular disease, certain cancers. Even GI-wise, we see like for Crohn's and colitis, IBS, IBD, things like that. That we're ranking top across the country.
And I guess that has a lot to do with our culture and our lifestyle. But Tara, you like to use our culture and make it healthier.
Absolutely. Yeah. As opposed to stomping it down and trying to forget everything that we've done.
So can you give us a few examples on that?
Absolutely. I think with our eating habits, we learn from our parents, we learn from theirs. It trickles down through the generations as we go through.
Like the Sunday jigs dinner?
Absolutely. Okay. We had it every Sunday, and then we'd have cold plates for supper.
Yes.
And, a couple of times during the week we'd be having cooked meals as well, like heavy meals. And I think, one of the factors that we need to look at, because we learned from the generations, is that years ago, people ate for their lifestyle. So people were more active than what we are now. So years ago in Newfoundland, times were economically tough. So family size was large. There was a lot of children. So you can make your bread, grow your potatoes. And it kind of became staple foods in our province as well. I can remember being a little girl. I spent a lot of time and a lot of my summers in Carmenville. And I can remember my great-grandfather would tell me stories about, they'd be up at dawn and fishing, and then come home and have a big breakfast. They'd go again. Morning, noon, and night, Graham in the house did everything by hand. It was well water, there wasn't running water, so the physical demands of that, the way that they ate then, fit their lifestyle. So we've learned our eating habits there, and it trickles down through. So we're still trying to eat the same way they did and balance our plates out, but it's harder to do that now because we're not as active.
Are there any typical traditional Newfoundland foods to strictly avoid? And I'm thinking like salt meat crunchings. Is this something that they can work on, or is it something that they just have to say it's a no-no?
I think anything in moderation. We just have to define what the moderation is, as that's a word that means different people, different things to different people. I think if we rebuild our plates, we can certainly incorporate it in. Like, for example, with the cooked dinner, Sunday dinner, maybe 3 or 4 times a year, incorporate the salt meat in. What I tend to do just have it the way that we normally have it.
So it's not a weekly thing.
So it's not a weekly thing. How we roll. But the other thing you can do too to actually help with it, I guess a couple of options. One thing is how we actually cook our vegetables and the portions of what we actually cook.
Yes.
So if I have salt meat, say more than 3 or 4 times a year, I'm more likely to cook the peas pudding and the cabbage in the pot with the salt meat, and I cook my root vegetables in a separate pot. You'll cut the sodium in half in that meal just by doing that one thing.
Oh, okay.
And it still gives your meal flavor, because that's a big thing. We have to enjoy our food. There's a certain amount of fulfillment that comes from that as well. And I think the other thing is that the way that we load up our plates, if you notice of the volume of potatoes we cut up when we're doing a cooked dinner compared to carrot and turnip and cabbage, it gets smaller and smaller amounts down the line. But really, if we cut up more turnip and carrots and a little bit less potatoes, that ratio can actually balance our plate off a little bit better. So the idea is, like most Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, when we fill up our plate with cooked dinner, we tend to go for the potato, the dressing, the peas pudding, the salt meat first. And then we put on our meat, whatever it might be, turkey, beef, pork, whatever it might be. And then on the last little bit is where we put a tip of a piece of carrot, a half a piece of turnip,
yes,
and smidges of cabbage. The ratios are off. So if we got our plate and we've got an empty plate, whatever we put on an empty plate first, we naturally put more of on.
Yeah.
So if we put our carrot, turnip, and our cabbage on first, so that takes up half our plate, and then put the meat on second, and then put our potato and our dressing and our peas pudding on. Your plate is actually a healthy balance, and you can fit that in a little bit better. Your body will digest it.
I've read somewhere about nightshade vegetables. And I think the study I read was we really need to control the intake of nightshade vegetables because of some healthy issues with those.
From the holistic perspective, again, you've got to take and apply to you what's important to you and to balance it out. With the nightshades, again, I'd have to do a little bit more research on that, but we did touch on it when I did the holistic program. And the nightshade vegetables, sometimes they can contribute to inflammation, so people with arthritis and things like that. The starch here, sometimes tomatoes, peppers as well.
Peppers,
right?
yeah.
So, broad is wide, it is long. Like a lot of times, if I have clients that come in, we'll start looking at where their starting point is, and we might tiptoe over to that over time, as opposed to just going from, making a giant leap to make a change, because it's too much sometimes to cut out of the diet. There's other nutritional values that might help when we can be working on, for inflammation, we can be working on fluid balance and reducing down the amount of sodium in the diet, increasing water. There's lots of other things, reducing sugar. Sugar causes a lot of inflammation in the body as well. So there's ways to balance that out. And I think with the Newfoundland diet, the way that we, traditionally build our meals, if we start putting those starches on our plate last, that actually helps with inflammation.
People are saying, well, it can get to be expensive to buy organic.
Absolutely.
So can you just talk a little bit about, you don't have to buy everything organic.
One of the general rules I try to think of is try to think local and buy from your local farm. But again, the further the food has to travel, the more chemical is going to be on it. When they say obviously something's organic, it just means that there's no pesticides, herbicides being used.
Right.
But certain foods we know have more than others. So I think local and try to buy globally what's closest to us, and that makes a big difference. And even in saying that, obviously food availability, we're with our climate here in our province during the summer months, it's we have more access to better quality fresh fruit and vegetables. I usually try to buy and preserve them for the winter months, as opposed to having to rely on the other foods during the that have to be shipped in. And sometimes if they're sitting on the back of a truck for 2 weeks, what do they have on them to get them here? So it kind of takes that a step further as well.
That's a good point. The farther they have to travel, the more pesticides.
So, Terry, you're talking about eating for the seasons. So whatever is in season, that should be a priority.
Absolutely. A lot of times we don't realize that the foods that we like is influenced by what time of year it is. During the fall of the year and in the winter, our body, we tend to go for heavier, heartier, saucier foods because our body's trying to fatten itself up for the winter. That excess amounts of fat stores keep us nice and warm and cozy. Into the spring and into the summer, we like colder foods because our body's trying to cool itself down. So from a holistic perspective, we really look at that. So we tend to eat for the seasons. And that's why when someone tries to make a lifestyle change in the summer months, they're doing great and wonderful with all these salads and, probably following along in the Mediterranean diet and things like that, and put us into October, November, January, February, and we don't want to look at those foods, and we think it's us. And we can take the same foods, we just change up the cooking methods and, roast them or saute or, steam can make a big difference as opposed to raw.
Sadly enough, Tara, as you know, the price of food, being isolated here in an island, and I assume it's even worse up in Labrador, being isolated, the price of food obviously is going to have an impact on what we can afford to buy.
Yeah, they have. And I think like anything, we can plan around and make it affordable. Everyone compares a 2 liter of milk to a 2 liter of Pepsi. Well, what about a bag of apples to a box of granola bars?
Yeah.
There's big savings there. So it might cost a little bit more in one area, but you'll save in others. It's kind of like we just did a major renovation at home, and we might have gone over in one area and under in another just to be able to balance that budget out.
Right.
So we do the same concept with food. Interestingly enough, I worked with a family of 5 a couple of years ago, and they were really good budgeters, and they tracked their finances from year to year, or in month to month, so they could compare one January to the next when they were actually making the lifestyle change before and during. And what they found, if they looked at their grocery bill and compared it to the grocery bill was higher with the lifestyle change. However, when they compared their total food bill, so this was trips to fast food restaurants or trips to, a drugstore if something was on sale. So when they compared the total food bill for the family of 5, they were actually saving about $250 a month because the foods that we buy at the grocery store go further and cuts down on excess spending in other areas.
That's interesting.
So, Tara, I guess supporting local farmers, going to your farmers markets and buying local. We talked about fad diets, and some people say the Mediterranean diet is supposed to be a great diet. We know we talked about low-carb diets and a keto diet, and so, there's must be billions of dollars spent worldwide on diets and quick fixes, but there's also the harmful side. So can you speak to these fad diets?
I think, a lot of times when we look at fad diets, we need to look at the reasoning behind why would you make those changes? What's it about? Is it about weight loss, or is it about therapeutic side of things towards health? So there's a fine line between what can be recommended and not. And that's where some diets can be harmful to our body and our health, and we don't really realize. And I think the other concerning fact is, like with any type of fad diet, so major change in a short period of time, a lot of times we can't sustain that. Studies show that when we're doing a fad diet, in 85% of cases, it works for weight loss. However, only in about 15% of cases does it last longer than 2 years. So we're unable to maintain and sustain it. And that's something that's really important. And, if it's a change that you cannot sustain, that causes more havoc to our body. So let's say somebody, for example, was at 300 pounds and dropped 50 pounds in a 2 or 3 month period, major weight loss, short period of time. It's not how much weight we lose, it's what we lose, it's quality weight loss. So it's either going to be fluid, muscle mass, or adipose or fat tissue. So when we lose weight very, very quickly, you're chipping away at our muscle mass along with the adipose tissue, and we can't sustain it because, again, we know the stats on that. So the weight comes back on and we go back to the original weight. Now we're actually probably up 2 clothing sizes. We have a harder time to get the same results when we do it again the next time. And the reason being is that we've just increased our percentage of body fat, because when the weight comes back on, it does not come back on as muscle, it comes back on as fat. The higher the percentage of body fat we have, it actually increases our risk of developing cardiovascular disease. There's also a connection between cardiovascular disease and diabetes. They go hand in hand. So health-wise, it doesn't stack up if we're yo-yoing all throughout our life. And that could be 10 or 15 pounds. It doesn't have to be big amounts. If we've been yo-yoing 20 pounds for 20 years, that's a big change in our body composition. The reason it gets harder is that it actually slows down our metabolism, because we've chipped away at our muscle mass. The more muscle that we have in our frame, the higher our metabolism will run.
So just talk to people about the keto diet and having your body in ketosis, because we hear the terms a lot, but I guess maybe a lot of listeners don't really understand what that is.
Well, it is, and that one I find is really trendy. And, as consumers, the trends influence our buying habits of what we're doing that way as well. And that's where it comes into play that with ketosis, it forces our body to burn our own stores. So it's almost like if we've got, I almost view it as if you've got power on in your house, the lights are on, you've got full steam, full energy. That's when we fuel properly from the foods that we're eating. Our body meant for us to fuel from food. If, however, we haven't fueled from food, what happens is almost like the power cuts out and we start running on generator mode. So yeah, we got fuel, but we're not quite batting at 100. At that point, the body is in ketosis, where we start taking our own stores, our own fat stores, and converting them back to glucose to burn for fuel. It's really hard for kidney health. So over time, again, and most people can't stick to it for a long time, it's a short time. But, kidney health, when the body's in that ketosis frame for a long period of time, kidney health is something that's really, really important that needs to be factored in there. Now, in saying that, for weight loss, that's one reason why people use ketogenic diet. Ketogenic diet is a substantial amount of protein, not as high as what Atkins would be, but we actually increases our fat stores, and you can allow carbs up to 16 to 18 grams maximum. Plus, there's a vitamin and mineral content that you have to take supplement-wise because you're cutting all these things out. But like anything, you can twist it and be taking in all kinds of unhealthy fats as opposed to healthy. So what happens with it sometimes is that people are, using bacon and sausage and pepperoni sticks all the time as opposed to higher quality protein and higher quality fats. So that's where, again, a defining line comes into play. In saying that, I've personally worked with several clients who have MS. And for a therapeutic basis, what we see is that the ketogenic diet seems to actually help, which is interestingly enough. So to get a long-term study, which needs to be done, it takes about 20 to 25 years to get the good numbers and stuff. But with the clients I've worked with, we've seen a benefit there as well, which is interesting. And that's the difference between doing something for weight loss and therapeutic.
Mm-hmm. Would you consider because it's been around a long time, the Mediterranean diet a fad diet, or would that be something that would probably come as close to being helpful as to any of them.
So, Tara, I guess we should clarify when we talk about diet in terms of fad diet or diet versus a lifestyle, which is, I guess, what you're referring to as the Mediterranean diet.
That is a real
Okay.
I think that the diet industry, over the last 30 or 40 years has really taught us to diet. Diet implies restricting and cut back, and that's what we've been taught. We have not been taught to increase our food volume and nourish and nurture our bodies.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going around, no wonder we're tapping with, so many medical conditions when we're starving ourselves and, very little nutrient content to the foods that we're eating. Whereas the Mediterranean diet, they're the healthiest people in the world. But in saying that, geographically, we talked about before, eating for the seasons, if it's January, the Mediterranean diet is not going to be too appealing to us here in our province because it's so cold out and they're not the foods that we want that time.
I guess we're talking mainly fruits and vegetables, correct?
Yeah, and it kind of ties in, I think, even with the food guide that came out this year as well. They're really pushing to increase our vegetables and fruit content, to go with more like beans and lentils for proteins and, seafood and fish and, healthier grains, again, made from scratch, real versus fake, and encouraging people to eat in our kitchen and socializing, which is very much the Mediterranean lifestyle of where we would go into play, right? So I think it's adapting that to meet our demographic here. So again, raw might not be as appealing here, and the food availability is going to be different here than what we would have if we were in the Mediterranean area.
Have we gotten any closer to figuring out what is the daily recommended for sugar? Because I know the last time we talked, there is nothing on a label that says the daily requirement. So I've read that you really don't need sugar at all. Really eliminate it from your diet altogether, or certainly drastically control it, because when you look at how much tablespoons of sugar is in a regular soft drink, it's kind of scary, isn't it? So Absolutely. Can you just talk to sugar for a minute? Because I've heard that can be causes for inflammation.
Oh, it's unbelievable. Well. It's like for so many years we looked at fat was the demon and the evil, but sugar just kind of went by the radar. Really, when we look at grams of sugar on a food label, it's very deceptive. There is no recommended amount. I said at roundtable discussions a few years ago, Minister from Ottawa was down, and they were talking about setting the standard for it, and they were going to set the standard at 100 grams and base a percentage off that. So if a product had 18 grams of sugar, it would resonate that it was 18%, so it makes the numbers easy. So I was sitting there, and I was surprisingly the only nutritionist in the room. There's representatives from Heart and Stroke, Diabetic Association, like all kinds of different things. So after a little bit, I just raised my hand and I said, you realize that by setting that standard at 100 grams, you're letting Canadians anticipate that it's okay to have 25 teaspoons of sugar a day, because that's what that translates into. So that kind of started the discussion saying, well, okay, it might be easy number-wise. However, that's not okay. What the World Health Organization recommends is that we should not consume over 6 teaspoons of sugar a day, which is about 24 grams. In saying that could be allowable for a chocolate bar a day, because we can take it and kind of skew it to meet our needs. The debate goes out, and I think there's more discussion that could happen on sugar-free products versus a little bit of sugar. I'm not a fan of sugar-free products either. Things like aspartame, Splenda, sucralose, saccharin, things like that. They actually help increase our risk of developing type 2 diabetes. But in saying that, you don't want too much, you don't want too little. I think with sugar, what's really important is to make sure it's from a higher fiber source. If we get sugar that's into our bloodstream really, really quickly, that actually helps increase our fat stores, and we don't really make that connection as well. So it's being able to reduce it down. If you look at a food label, grams of sugar, if you divide by 4, it'll tell you the approximate number of teaspoons to give us a visualization, and that might be a little bit of an eye-opener to say how much is in it.
Absolutely.
But I don't agree with too much of it, because I think as a society, the average Canadian is about 25 teaspoons of sugar, which is way too much. That's more than quadruple the recommended amount.
Great discussion, Tara, as always. How can people get in touch with you?
You can visit our website. It's healthy-balance.ca. I've been in practice for 10 years, and then last year just expanded to become a holistic health group. So we have other healthcare practitioners. We have a counselor, Heather Hopkins, a registered massage therapist, Chelsea Billings, and we actually have a rotating health practitioner room, because a lot of times people who want to practice holistic health, sometimes they do it full time, they're working elsewhere, so we've got like an option to be able to offer more services, and a community room that we can offer workshops and group work out of as well, just just to try to help as many people as we can.
Thanks, Tara, for taking the time out of your busy day to come and talk to us. That's it for this week, everybody. We'll be back next week with another interesting guest.